Hi, everybody. I'm Hunter. Thanks for joining. Happy Friday. I want to share, as we put in some of the promotional materials, I want to share some perspective on inflation and on what's going on out in the consumer marketplace right now. Some of what I'll share, I originally communicated and talked with analyst Nick Modi in his weekly call, and anyone that caught that will see some new information, some additional context in here. So we're gonna go through some pretty simple looks at what are really some pretty sophisticated data that we collect. And I'd really invite a lot of Q&A. I find that it's more enjoyable for me when we can kind of react and collaborate. I certainly have a good amount of things to share. We'll keep this to a half hour or so, but please, in the comments, there is a bit of a lag, but please, in the comments, ask questions. If I don't get to them, I'll follow up with you after the session. But I welcome any thoughts or observations that that everybody has. So before we jump into it, let's think about real life for a minute. Let's just kind of step back from this. It's easy in our work and our working lives to get very caught up in data and analysis. And Julie, if we can bring up that first page. I have my teammate Julie helping me navigate here. So think about a negative event in your life. Think about something bad that happened. I mean, think whether it was this morning on the way into the office, or when you were trying to get people out the door to their summer activities, or maybe something bigger, in your career, your life. What was your reaction to it? Did you immediately open a spreadsheet and pull out your calculator and download an app that helped you analyze it? No, you had a very emotional response to it. I mean, that's human nature. Is to have a very emotional response to stressors, to bad things. You hear all the things that's familiar to us. You lose sleep over it. You worry about it. Things get blown out of proportion in your mind. That's all very emotional response. And yet when we listen to, and when you look at kind of everything out in the media and on LinkedIn and everywhere else about, inflation and what's going on with inflation, it's all very analytical. It's very much about spending power and stimulus money and unemployment rates. Those all matter, and those are going to impact behavior. But more important, there's the analogy of the iceberg that anyone in insights and marketing is familiar with. All that stuff is the tip of the iceberg that's up above the water. The stuff below the surface is much more meaningful. Everybody's heard, even in just pop culture, that 90% of our decision making is emotional. This is a very emotional period that we've been through with the pandemic and that we're going into, and yet that hasn't been talked about as much. And what I hope to do today is, probably everybody's going, yeah, okay, it's emotional, I get it. There is a science to it. That does give us data, and that does give us some prediction on what people are going to do. There's a lot out there right now that I'm reading that's saying people are hesitant to do this. People say they're going to do that. We all know, anyone in marketing knows that what people say they're going to do or say they did and actually do are almost unrelated. We humans are very bad at explaining or predicting our own behavior. So we're going to talk about emotion today, but we're going to do it in a way that's really pointed at what you can do to drive your business. So we're going to talk about the psychological underpinnings of rising prices. And one thing that I hear a lot, even in C-suites, is how will consumers react if, and it's usually followed with, if we take another round of pricing? How will people, what will people do as prices increase? And I mean, literally, that's like the question that's pondered. And yet, we all know that that's not how marketers look at our audiences, our marketplace. We segment, we refine, we look at, we understand that people are not a homogeneous group, and our target audience is rarely consumers. It's something that we're trying to be more refined about. And yet, kind of to my point a moment ago on this whole inflationary period, we're looking at it in this very macro space. So what I'm going to share with you today is some really fundamental cognitive measures that we use. And this is a really simple graphic that our principal neuroscientist, Siggy Hale, created. His, of course, has a lot more detail, but I've simplified it for today's purposes. And the gist is this: we want to drive behavior. We want to understand behavior. A lot of market research then looks at perception. And that can get messy because it's what people think they think. So what we're measuring is what we might call the operating system of the mind, of the brain, the fundamental cognition that lets us really diagnose why people do what they do. And so this is what I'm going to share with you in a second here is derived from our OmniPulse measure. It's a US rep pop measure that we measure every month with a quantitative sample using really unusual neuroscience-based activities. There's a screenshot on the left of somebody taking one of these. This is a word cloud sort. So essentially what it does is lets us understand people's perception unbeknownst to them. It really gets between the ears, as we say, of what's driving them. And then it's backed by a pretty sophisticated analytics suite run by our neuroscience team and database that we're able to reference on an ongoing basis. This is, so here you have it. This is something that my teammates and I would see kind of coming out of it. So you see how simple this is. We're mapping behavior and we're measuring things related to the autonomic nervous system. There's a lot of cuts and a lot of measures that we're analyzing, and you can see these kind of line charts. What a lot of these are looking at is longitudinal data over the past couple of years. But boiling that down, and again, I don't expect anybody to necessarily understand exactly what these lines mean, but these are these trend lines that we look at over time. And you can see this view goes back to pre-COVID, which is the kind of database on the far left, and then moving through some select periods up until more or less present. And what we've seen essentially is that the emotionally based drivers have been trending up. The red and the purple are the really emotive drivers. The green and the blue are the more social and practical. And so that red and that purple, particularly that red ticking up, really tells us that there's a strong sentiment being felt out in the general population. And basically what it tells us is that about 2/3 of the US population, so we do measure globally on an ad hoc basis, but looking at our core measure in the US, think of this as like 3 different people. One out of 3 out in the world is looking at all this inflationary pressure with a rational mindset. 2/3 are looking at it with a more emotive mindset. In other words, their behavior is driven more by their emotional response than a logical one. And yet, that blue circle, the left side of this chart, is the one that everybody's pondering and talking about. Dollars and cents, trade up, trade down, when will they stop eating out, et cetera, et cetera. What's being ignored and what's more influential to the majority of consumers is things related to experience and things related to impulsivity and behavior. I'm going to talk more about that. One thing that Nick Modi has been talking a lot about, and it's been kind of covered in the press, is this idea of revenge spending. And revenge spending is essentially the phenomenon that, the way it's described generally is everybody has a bunch of pent up demand. All the things we couldn't do during the pandemic, we're now kind of splurging on, consumers are splurging on. And so, when you look at that, some of the things that are experiencing a lot of growth as mobility has improved, et cetera, it starts to give some explanation of what types of things these mindsets would be, quote, revenge spending on. So more logic-based mindset and consumers who are behaving based on that are those that are revenge spending on home improvement. It makes sense. Home improvement's an investment. You get it back. It's a rational revenge spend. However, people that are more driven by experience and people that are reacting to this stress with the more experiential reaction are those that are traveling. Hey, I'm going to take the trip. And the more impulsive are those that are, for example, more prone to dining out. And there's a lot to it. This isn't just pent up demand. This isn't just that we weren't able to do it. There's a heuristic called the availability heuristic that basically amounts to consumers saying, it's only going to get more expensive, so I might as well do it now. There's a lot going into this revenge spending, but the headline of revenge spending is that it's kind of irrational. If people are worried about their finances, I'm going to share some data on this, they wouldn't be taking big trips, they wouldn't be dining out. And yet everything we do, and particularly for 2/3 of the population, this is not as much a practical concern as it is an emotional experiential one. So a lot of the discussions that we hear are kind of the left side of this, the logic. one established question is, when will people trade down to store brands? When will they trade from premium national brands to a portfolio like you see here? Just simply start buying what's cheapest. That's a very logical discussion. At what point will someone assess that they don't have spending power to buy what they want to buy? And there's a real component of that. I'm certainly not saying that dollars in the pocket is not going to influence behavior, but the right side of this is equally and frankly more important in that discussion. What are the things that will provide an experience? What are the things that will serve impulse? In categories like soft drinks and treats and confections and snacking and QSR, we see in our data those are much more durable categories in consumers' minds. It's going to take a lot more inflation to disrupt that behavior. And there are some lessons in there that any category, bath tissue, anything, can use in order to thrive. What we're really counseling with our clients is, look, there are routes out of this. There are ways that with strategy you can win. There's been some interesting data that Walker Smith and team at Kantar has been presenting about inflationary periods over time, looking at like a 50-year database. And the long and short of it is, there's emphatic data that in tough times, some brands will win and some brands will lose. Everybody's not going to lose equally. The brands that use strategy and have a better insight on the marketplace, there's actually a really unique opportunity coming up, and that's what we're trying to guide here. So, of course, price concern has been popping up. These lines look at a few just basic income breaks. So, basically this essential concern of, will it be worth what it costs? Concern over the dollar spent. Yes, you can see the trend line here. It's gone up. But what's really notable here is look who it's gone up with the most. Households with over $75,000 income. And, we track these in more detailed income cuts. But these are just kind of three macro cuts that represent some sort of swaths out in the US population. The higher income households are more worried about price. The middle income households follow, and the lowest income households, they're going up, but relative to their quote wealthier cohorts, they're less concerned about that. They're actually expressing, we're not just asking them, how worried are you about price? We're using these neuroscience measures that let us get more to their psychology. This to me is a really glaring example that, the pure price, everybody's saying, income constrained households are going to have the hardest time. They're going to be the worst off. That is true. I mean, and I do not mean to, diminish the importance of their actual spending power and things, but psychologically, that's not what they're the most worried about. When we look, and I show this table with a heap of salt versus a grain, because I don't want to or intend to be reductionist about this. These are themes or trends. I'm happy to talk in more detail. So this is not meant to be a sweeping declaration, but we do see in our data some interesting trends that those who are encountering the past couple years and this inflationary period with a more logical view, a more rational, yes, I'll make some choices. I'll start thinking more about the brands I buy, et cetera, et cetera. Those actually tend towards the wealthier households. As we move into the more impulsive, in the more experiential, the thinking with your gut, kind of following your instincts, that sentiment tends towards lower income households. Likewise, the more logical, we see skews a bit more female as you move towards the more emotive or irrational, emotionally driven. It's more male and younger, and then again the more logic driven, more kind of rational, practical households tend older. So, again, a lot of categories are saying, wow, we're really worried about what's going to happen with Gen Z and younger millennials and things like that. In our data, we're seeing that, generally speaking, as you move towards those younger cohorts, emotion's going to be a much more potent ingredient in this cocktail than pure dollars. And that's not to say that people aren't worried. But interestingly, when you look at the section, the roughly third of the population who has this more logical, rational approach, and those that information and those considerations are driving their behavior, they're the most worried about the macro economy. You can see, 60% versus 49 and 46 with the other two. Then when you consider via very worried about their own job and finances, it flips. So the more logic-minded cohorts are less concerned about their own personal finances. As you move into those who are really experiencing all of this with a very emotion-forward set of behavioral drivers, they are concerned about it. So it's not that they've just got rose-colored glasses or don't get it or don't appreciate it. They're concerned about it. It's that their reaction is very different. And don't worry about all these shapes and things. What's interesting on this table is the X, and you basically see the diametric opposition between the more rational logic and the more impulsive being kind of two ends of the spectrum. Essentially, you see that the logic-minded, group who's responding to inflation with sort of a rational mindset, they're concerned with high prices. That's sort of where the conversation has began and ended in general over recent months. But look at the right side, the reds, the more impulsive-minded group. They're concerned, yes, with pricing, but not the prices themselves. They're frustrated by the hassle of having to shop on price. In other words, this is annoying. This is frustrating. This is emotional. It's not an accounting concern. They're not trying to be more analytical and get a better handle on household finances. They're having an emotional response that I don't want to have to shop this way. I don't want to have to deal with this. So another longitudinal cut here, and again, these three lines are looking at income levels. This measure is essentially measuring what these lines represent is essentially measuring this very impulsive compulsion, essentially the impulse to do what feels good in the moment, with decreasing concern over long-term factors or consequences. So, deep in our emotional minds and in our subconscious, there is this driver to, sort of pursue what feels good. You see again that in recent months, this is ticking up with everybody. But interestingly, it's ticking up the most. This flips from the one I showed previously with concern over pricing. Lower income households are feeling that increase the most. You see that middle income households actually have the most dramatic increase, and higher income households are ticking up, but lower than their lower income peers. And this tells us that people are having a very emotional response. This impulsive driver that's deep within us is ticking up with everybody, which is so counter to what's being talked about kind of out in the world of spending power and dollars and how much do I have in savings. That compulsion is not driving up. That's diminishing at the expense of this more emotional response. And it's really instructive to brands, because what this tells us, and with all these data in mind, is people are not buying food or drink or packaged goods. They're buying a bit of relief. And particularly in categories, I'm seeing a lot that, people are concerned about less likely to buy a car, less likely to buy a house. Perhaps, and interest rates and things have a lot to do with that. But in the more consumable space, this is a really important theme to remember, that, when somebody walks into a store and they're buying, a snack, salty snacks, soft drinks, beer, or even things that aren't as highly sensorial, personal care, household care type things, they're not necessarily making every decision based on logic. And so saying, when will they trade down, really needs to be followed by saying, well, it depends on if you give them good reasons not to. And so everybody's having this discussion around how high can we push pricing? When's the pricing cliff? When we hit the pricing cliff? The discussion that should be being had is, how are we going to really serve the experience, a valuable experience, and serve their impulsive emotional desire to let themselves control how they feel? And that is like brand 101. That is the role of brands, giving people a means by which they can control how they feel. And categories like food and beverage are exemplars. They're really good examples of, and they're very intimately linked to the way people feel. In other words, the things we consume gives us a lot of control over our mood regulation, and essentially, lets us impact our own feelings. So, imagine somebody walking into a store. If every brand and every retailer is focused on price, 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 it's going to create this desert of positive experience, things that make me feel better. I mean, instead of taking, 3 cents out or eating into your margin, think about promotions that give them access to exclusive events. I mean, imagine, like, instead of worrying about the price of, a bag of chips, thinking about the way that bag of chips can serve the right size of this, the way that brand can give them access to, a gaming event or an online concert or something that actually elevates the experience and lets them serve this desire to kind of do what feels good in the moment. Those are the brands, those are the retailers that are going to win. Those that stay on the left side of this chart, the left third, it's going to be very frustrating because, look, price pressure is going up. I mean, it's a zero-sum game at some point. There's only so much you can do. So it's very unsatisfying. More importantly, those that focus on the right side of this are the ones that are going to win and actually have some opportunity. One thing that we measure on an ongoing basis is retailer engagement, and this is this radar chart is a bit. Once you get used to it, it's kind of easy to read. But what these three lines represent is essentially what people do. That's the solid line. What people like. That's the kind of red filled area. And then the small dotted line is how strongly these retailers align with the driver of behavior. In this case, this represents the red, that most impulsive, do what feels good now. And one thing, a couple takeaways I have from this is, Target is doing that well, and Target has strong alignment. So people who have this emotional response and are feeling that, they're not telling anybody that, but in their heart of hearts, that's how they're reacting to all this pressure. Target's doing a pretty good job of that, and people are very attached to it. They really like to shop there. You see Amazon really kind of pinning the needle in terms of aligning with that. So you see the headline here, everyone better make ground on Amazon in terms of delivering experience in e-com. Now you can talk about these from a media perspective, from a retail, from an omni-channel perspective, and we're happy to look at any of that. But this was just one that is kind of an interesting example to me specific to e-com, because Amazon is doing a really strong job of it. So, when you think about your programs and activation, like look at, this is the top third, above the fold on Amazon grocery. The very first thing you're served is a little mini cooking show, how to make delicious dishes. It's got this featured, sponsor of Rubbermaid, but it's very experiential. If you scroll down to the kind of top half, the next ad you're served is for this new Monster innovation, and look at the creative: refresh, recover, revive. It's much more experiential. It's much more about, if you were someone who had this kind of red mindset and you're navigating through and you're frustrated and you want, essentially, you're trying to find things that you can buy to make you feel better. Again, that's the emotional explanation. You can see where this is very experiential. It kind of leads with an experience. Then versus something like, and not to pick on any individual retailers, but if you look at a lot of e-com sites, they're the front end of a database. There's drop downs, there's search bars, there's very verbal categorizations in the taxonomy. If you know what you're looking for, this will help you navigate through and find it. And when you look at a product detail page like this, again, to the question of when will people trade down, here's, all of the great value, or many of the great value categories kind of all on one page. Yes, this gives you, what it is, how much it costs, in a very comparative way. But if you're somebody who's looking, and your motivation is to find things that will provide relief, that will give you this emotionally based experience, let you discover and explore, this is not a shopper experience that rewards that, or is geared to that. So just a couple of examples, and there are many more. And if you catch any of my LinkedIn content, we talk about this a lot. But the big takeaway here is, remember this. I mean, screenshot this page and take it into your discussions. And when the team is focused on the left side of this and stuck, because the rubber's made in the road. input prices are continuing to rise. Retailers are starting to reject pricing. The left side of this has sort of gotten us as far as it's going to get us. The big release here is that the right side of this is much more important, much more influential on people's behavior, and gives you real strategic opportunities to not sell less or take product out, shrinkflation, things like that, but provide more in terms of the experience, provide more in terms of arm's reach, impulsivity that lets people do something that lets them and their family feel a bit of relief from mounting pressure. So anybody that I'm happy to discuss any of these in more detail. If anyone would like to reach out to me, my contact info is down on the lower right there, and can certainly reach out via LinkedIn. I said sometimes the Q&A gets a bit laggy, and it looks like there may be an issue kind of loading some of these. So if you do have any questions or follow-ups, feel free to reach out to me via email or via LinkedIn. And with that, I wish everybody a great weekend. Thanks for joining.